in today's shiur, we want to continue doing what we've done the past few weeks, which is talking about historical events, specifically in the history of the state of Israel, and how these historical events created certain halachic challenges, questions that were discussed amongst the poskim, the rabbis of Israel. And today we're going to skip all the way to 2019, really right around the corner, and we're going to mention possibly an event which, even though it happened 3 years ago, I am not so convinced that everyone remembers it as such a significant event. And I admit that I am going to use this historical event rather than try to explain to why it's an important one, but I'm going to use it as an opportunity to talk about a halachic question. The event I'm talking about is the attempt of Israel to send a spaceship, not really a spaceship, more like a spacecraft, to the moon. Israel tried to be one of the only countries in the world, by the way, there are not many, that actually successfully send a spacecraft to the moon. In 2019, February 2019, Israel tried to become one of those few countries. There was a lot of excitement in Israel at the time, and it was really everywhere in the news. On 5th of March, and this is what I really am going to mention here, because that's where our historical event is about, is that this lander, this spacecraft, took a selfie of itself back to Israel. It's a very well-known picture. You can all look it up, and you can see very clearly that this spacecraft had an Israeli flag attached to it, and it was quite unbelievable to see an Israeli flag flying in space. You saw the Earth in background and an Israeli flag, and it was actually a very big thing. I think many people made many people very proud that oh, thank you very much. There it is. To see an Israeli flag up in space, and unfortunately it did not make it. I mean, the flag actually did make it, but not in a safe way, because this aircraft crashed on the moon. Something happened on 11th of April, but I think it's very important to remember that it means that there is an Israeli flag on the moon. It's just not on a pole, it's not flapping, and it can't flap anywhere, there's no air there. But anyway, it's somewhere on the moon. And I want to talk a little bit about the significance of the flag, because the truth is, one could use the opportunity to talk about halacha and space, but that really will not be something connected so much to Israeli history, but rather to Bichlal, the history of mankind, which is a fascinating discussion. What is the halacha's response to man going to space? In my father's house, there was a book. Someone took it. I don't know where it is. I've been looking for it. There's a book from the 60s of Rav Kasher. Rav Kasher was a very big Talmid Chacham in America, wrote many important books. Rav Kasher wrote a book after man landed on the moon, and he discussed halachic questions that had to do with astronauts landing on the moon. And believe it or not, some people were actually theologically disturbed with this whole notion that we reached the moon, and he deals with these questions and issues. Keeping halacha in space is a very, very complicated thing. I didn't try it myself. I don't really think you should try it yourself. There's actually a website of the Star K. You can look it up. The Star K has an article. The Star K is a kashrut organization in America, and they have an article. I kid you not. They have an article online which goes through the different questions, and then at the end it says, due to the difficulties that we suggested in today's shiur, we highly recommend not to travel to space. It really creates many, many difficulties of keeping Shabbat and davening, and really, just imagine counting Sfrat Homer every time you go around around the earth. So that is not really something that's special to the state of Israel. But what is connected to this historical event is really the significance of the flag. Now, I think I perhaps I gave this year a long time ago. I don't remember which year I gave, but in 1948, the 48 war ended with an Israeli flag being hoisted down south in Eilat, a very famous flag. It's known as the ink flag because they didn't have a real flag, so they had to take a shmata and pour ink over it. And there's a very famous picture. You may have seen it. It's actually going to be the cover of my book, Please God, coming out now with these shirim. You can see the Israeli soldiers hoisting the Israeli flag in Eilat, and that became the symbol of the 48 War, one of the symbols of the 48 War, and more importantly, it really reflected the end of the 48 War, and with Israel de facto claiming its sovereignty over the entire Negev and reaching the shores of what we know today is the Eilat, the Mifratz Eilat, what's it called in English? I'm sorry, Aqaba, Eilat, what's it called? The Red Sea of Eilat, and again, the flag there became a symbol of sovereignty. Now, many people may sometimes get a little bit emotional when they see an Israeli flag, and I mean, I remember as a kid. I mean, I'm Israeli. I was born here. I remember when I went to Poland in 1988. We were one of the first groups of kids in Israel going to Poland, and I remember how important it was for us to walk around with the flags in Poland as kids going to Auschwitz. But I remember when we came back, and it's a hard trip, as I'm sure everyone that made that trip knows. I remember specifically, this was a long time ago, getting onto the El Al plane and seeing from far the Israeli flag, and I remember getting so emotional when I was a kid, getting emotional about the Israeli flag. So seeing the Israeli flag does create, I think by many, some kind of emotional feeling of pride, and because the flag is an important symbol. However, and that's my question today, is an Israeli flag, does it have any religious, halachic significance? Or is it just, something emotional that we have? So I would like to investigate this question today. And let's start a little bit of history of where this flag comes from. We know that the Israeli flag consists of a white flag, which on it we have two stripes of the color blue or light blue. And in the middle, of course, we have the Magen David. Where did this come from? Who suggested it? And who was the father of this idea? It was a person called David Wolfson. David Wolfson was a Zionist leader. He was the second president of the World Zionist Organization. He lived between 1856 and 1914. I think that many Israelis just know the name Wolfson because every city in Israel has a Wolfson Street. Not a very, I would say today, not as known as Herzl. However, interestingly enough, I say that because Herzl also suggested an Israeli flag it wasn't an Israeli flag, but a flag to represent the Zionist organization, and his option was turned down. Herzl wanted a flag of 7 stars. Why the number 7? Apparently, Herzl believed very much in the ethics of hard work. He believed that the only way we're going to be able to build a Jewish state is hard work. And the idea of 7 stars is a day for every day of the week, which we would have to work very hard. Now, in other words, and I'll say it very bluntly, this flag that he suggested would seem to be almost a attack against, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We know that the idea of keeping Shabbat is not just another mitzvah of the Torah. We know that it's considered to be one of the most essential, important mitzvot of the entire Torah. And I'm not going to go just right now why that's true, but it is true. And it would seem that it's a kind of a flag that rightfully would make religious people very upset and really feel a huge challenge with how they would respond to the Zionist movement. However, thank God, it was David Wolfson's suggestion that was accepted. His suggestion is what we know of the Israeli flag of today. But what's more interesting and fascinating is where he got this idea from. So if you will if you will follow this source sheet that I have here, you will see that I see that I can't see my own source sheet. Now I can. David Wolfson wrote, at the behest of our leader Herzl, I came to Basel. By the way, just now, there was a big thing last week in Basel, 120 years, I think, for the first Zionist convention. I actually was there once. Last year I went there. It was pretty awesome. I came to Basel, says Wolfson, to make preparations for the Zionist Congress. Amongst many other problems was the essence of the Jewish problem. What flag would we hang in the Congress Hall? An idea struck me. We have a flag, and it's blue and white. Now, this man, who is not a religious man, I don't think he was even traditional, right? Where did he get this from? To say that the talit, the prayer shawl, with which we wrap ourselves when we pray, that is our symbol, right? The stripes and the color of blue, originally from the tchelet of the talit. Let us take this talit from its bag and unroll it before the eyes of Israel and the eyes of all nations. So I ordered a blue and white flag with the shield of David painted upon it. That is how the national flag that flew over the Congress Hall came into being. Now, that is quite unbelievable, in my opinion, that the origins of our flag actually comes from the talit, from a very, very religious symbol that we are all familiar with. And I will get back to this and its meaning, I believe, in the history of the State of Israel. However, at this point, I would like to move to asking some halachic questions regarding the flag that came up already in the early 50s. And I don't know how common it is in South Africa, even though I was in Waverley Shul, and in Waverley, am I saying correctly? They had flags inside the shul. I remember there was a flag by the bima. They had an Israeli flag in the main shul. In America, it's very common. In America, most modern shuls have an American flag, an Israeli flag in the front of the shul by the bima, by the Aron Kodesh. Very, very common in America. And Rav Moshe Feinstein, one of the greatest poskim, if not the greatest posek of the 20th century in North America, was asked whether or not it's permissible to pray in a synagogue that have these flags displayed in them. Now, it's interesting to point out, by the way, those of you who visited Prague, I didn't. I'm still on my bucket list to go there one day, B'ezrat Hashem, more my wife's than mine. But in the Prague shul, in the oldest shul in Europe, the Alten shul, there's a flag that goes back, believe it or not, to the origins of this flag goes back to the 14th century. The flag that's currently on display there goes back to 1716, and this goes back to the 14th century, as I said before, when the Emperor Charles IV granted the Jews a right to wave their own flag. And if I'm not mistaken, this flag actually is purple, but there's a Magen David on it. So you see that this idea of Magen David, it was maybe Wolfson's suggestion, but I don't know if he knew about this flag already before or this was a known thing. But that's already an old thing, the flag, the Magen David. But what was interesting was his notion of, do people go dark now? Is there, are we okay?
So far, so good. No, that just happened. Correct. But we should still be on.
We'll be okay?
Carry on, yes.
Okay. Wow, it's very romantic like that, sitting in the dark, listening to shiur. Should I do the same to just make everyone feel comfortable, or should I just continue with the light on? I don't know. Okay.
You don't have to.
Okay. So going back to Rav Moshe Feinstein, apparently there were people that really weren't very clear about what is this flag doing in a shul. Even as I just mentioned, there was a precedent in Europe for this in Prague. Rav Moshe Feinstein's tshuva is really, really interesting. because, and I would like to use this opportunity of introducing three different responses to this question, which I believe reflect till today certain opinions that rabbis in the religious community have towards Zionism. I think that these tshuvot really reflect different attitudes that still exist today. Rav Moshe was very parv, right? What parv means, he wasn't fleishik, he wasn't milchik, he was very neutral about this whole thing. Meaning, he said, listen, let's look at this question from a very, very, cold, objective observation, and ask ourselves: Is there any halacha that would involve putting a flag in a shul without any problem? Is a flag anything religious or irreligious? And Moshe says, no. The truth is, he says it's nonsense. That's what he says. A flag is nothing, right? Meaning a flag he calls it devar chol. It's a secular object, right? So they says there's no halacha that you can't bring in a secular object into a shul. On the other hand, he says it's like it's nonsense. That's what he actually says. It's hevel, shtut. Like it would seem that as if there's no religious value to it, Rav Moshe disregarded it as something being important, right? As if the world is only looked upon as if something has religious value, and if not, then it's not important. That's what it seems from what he said. And then he says it's not really appropriate to bring a flag into shul, but at the same time, I can't really argue that it's a real prohibition to do so. So therefore, he concludes that it's actually wrong, he says, to put a flag in a synagogue. But, and this is very important, he says no machloket should be created regarding its removal, which I'm guessing was the issue. I'm guessing that some people came to Rav Moshe and they were like, oh, Rav Moshe, we got it. I'm just guessing, right? We got to take away this flag. It's like terrible. The Zionist flag is in the shul. And perhaps, I'm saying, it came from people who were anti-Zionist, didn't believe in the state of Israel or what it symbolized. And Rav Moshe told him, listen, I don't think it's a great idea to put a flag in, but at the same time, it's not a reason to start a fight in a machloket in the community. By the way, I'll just say at the side here that there's some very interesting questions about what you can take or do in a shul. Because regarding the sanctity of a shul, there's a big machloket amongst the Rishonim. What exactly is the status of a shul when it comes to performing or acting or other acts, secular acts within a shul? There was a very interesting tshuva of the Sridei Esh during the beginning of World War II, even before the war began, when the Germans took over. He discussed whether or not you're allowed to perform an orchestra, can an orchestra play music, a band in a synagogue, because at that time the Germans closed down all Jewish establishments. There's tshuvas of Rav Moshe himself about taking an eye-seeing dog for a blind person into a shul. There are tshuvot, of course, about taking food and drink into a shul. These are very interesting questions in the history of the Jewish people. What exactly is the status of a shul when it comes to using it for other purposes rather than just prayer? So I would say this tshuva of Rav Moshe really is part of that ongoing discussion of the religious status of a shul. I'll just say, because this is a very Zionist shiur, I will say that the Gemara tells us that there's a big difference between shuls in Chutz La'aretz and shuls in Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara tells us that if a shul is built with the condition that it's not going to be a permanent building, then there's more room to play with selling the shul or using the shul for other purposes. However, the Gemara states that every shul in Chutz La'aretz automatically, even if it didn't intend it to be, is built on a condition that it's not permanent. Every shul, the Gemara says, was built with the condition that one day it will move to Israel. Isn't that interesting? The Gemara says, Atidin batei knesiot bavel, to make aliyah. The Gemara says that the shuls themselves will make one day aliyah. And if that's true, then that means that no shul was ever built permanent. It was all temporary. And therefore, there's actually reason to be more lenient of how we behave in a shul, and what we use a shul for in Chutz La'aretz, than it would be in Eretz Yisrael. Anyway, that's Rav Moshe's opinion. What is important for us is that Rav Moshe did not see any real religious significance in a flag, and obviously in the Israeli flag itself. However, there's a tshuva here, and I will, in my source sheet, I will show you this tshuva. I found this tshuva, let me try to make it a bit bigger so you can see it. This is an interesting tshuva. It's not very well known. I was very proud that I found it. Of Reb Chaim Noah. Some of you may have heard of Reb Chaim Noah. Reb Chaim Noah was a Lubavitcher chassid, a big, prominent posek here in Israel in the first half of the 20th century. He, what he's known, by the way, for is that he was one of the rabbis who decided, I can say decided and ruled regarding all the shiurim, all the measurements. How do we translate Gemara, the Gemara's measurements into modern quantities, right? So if we know that we're supposed to drink a certain amount of wine for Kiddush, then the question is, what is that today in cc's, right? So he argued against the Chazon Ish, and most Jews that I think in the world go by Reb Chaim Noah. Like Reb Chaim Noah is considered to be the last kind of word when it comes to modern, what a kazait is and what a tefach is, right? We're coming to Arba Minim soon. We have to know how big the lulav is. We go by Reb Chaim Noah. Anyway, so Reb Chaim Noah was a very important posek. He discussed this question too, but unlike Rav Moshe, he had a very extreme opinion. In this tshuva of his, you can see that he wrote the following: Bidvar ha'amadat degel b'veit hakneset ukvar katafti, that al yesod she'ein mazkirim malchut shemaim b'virkat rachemna b'virkat hamazon lefi shemazkirim malchut beit David. The Gemara says that when we bench in the paragraph that mentions malchut beit David, we don't mention God. Why? Because when we have the malchut, the kingdom of David, and we talk about kings, mortal kings, it is disrespectful to talk about the King of Kings, God Himself, because we always have to differentiate and separate between human kings, mortal kings, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, he says that to take the flag of any country into a shul is problematic, because a shul, he says, is supposed to reflect the King of the world, the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and to bring into the shul a symbol which symbolizes Malchut Basar Vadam, the kingdom of men and the ruling of men, he says that would be terrible. But then he adds even more. Kal vachomer, if that's asur, if you follow my mouse, you'll see Kal vachomer al Malchut moredet b'Malchut Shamayim. He obviously was not a big fan of the Zionist movement, of the State of Israel, and he says, I was talking about a regular flag, but a Zionist flag, this flag of Israel, which symbolizes a rebellion against God, oy va'avoy, we are not allowed to put that flag in our shul. So here we have a real opposition to the idea of the flag. Now, what's fascinating to me is that within the so-called, it's very like a large community, but in the so-called Haredi community, I think one can find till today the DNA, as if, of both these approaches. On one hand, we have many Jews in the Haredi community that, am I okay? Can people hear me? Did I just freeze now? I think I froze. Okay.
All good.
We can hear.
Okay, so I think that till today in the Haredi community, you will find people that Rav Moshe Feinstein's approach still, is somehow their opinion, which is, listen, it's nothing bad, nothing good. We're powerful about the Israeli flag and Zionism. It's like could be good, could be bad, but it really doesn't really mean much in our lives. And then you have the more radical, the extremists who like Reb Chaim Noah, who fight the idea of the flag and say this is a terrible thing and reflects Zionism. However, let's move now to two other rabbis within what we would call the religious Zionist community who ruled very differently. And again, this will reflect the different opinions today in the religious Zionist community. And I will start with Rabbi Soloveitchik, who addressed this question. In the case of Rabbi Soloveitchik, is a little bit different. The history of this story of Rabbi Soloveitchik's opinion is in the 60s. There was a conference in Jerusalem, in Yerushalayim, of the Aguda. The Aguda, the Haredi rabbis community, came together to meet in. Some of you, I don't know who's exactly here, but it depends upon your age. This will show your age. There used to be a hotel in Yerushalayim called the Merkaz Hotel. I don't know if people are aware of it. It was in the center of town. It was a religious hotel. It's not there anymore, but if I'm not mistaken, it was the hotel where very from people used to go to. This hotel had on its roof, like many hotels do, they had a lot of flags flying, flying there, and amongst them was the Israeli flag. The Israeli flag was flying over this hotel. And apparently these rabbis were very upset to have a Aguda conference in a building which has the Israeli flag flying over it. What they agreed to do is to, like I just said, they added more flags. And then they said, oh, well, if there's a British flag, an American flag, and a South African flag, an Australian flag, then the Israeli flag doesn't stand out. So they went on with the conference only after they added all the other international flags. Rabbi Soloveitchik that year, 1960, what year was that? I don't remember. Somewhere in the early 60s, spoke at the Mizrahi conference. As you know, Rabbi Soloveitchik was the head of the Mizrahi movement in North America. It was more of like an honorary position. He didn't run the Mizrahi movement, but he was considered to be the face of the Mizrahi in some level. And he gave a very famous speech that was written and printed up. And he basically claimed in his speech, we don't need the Union Jack to provide a heter for the Israeli flag. And this is what he said here. If you ask me, I'm reading here from your source sheet, how do I look upon the flag of the state of Israel, and has it any halachic value? I would answer plainly. In the Shulchan Aruch it says, one who has been killed by non-Jews is buried in his clothes, so that his blood may be seen and avenged. In other words, the clothes of the Jew acquire a certain sanctity when spattered with the blood of a martyr. How much more, says Soloveitchik, is this so of the blue and white flag, which has been immersed in the blood of thousands of young Jews who fell in the War of Independence, defending the country and the population. It has a spark of sanctity that flows from devotion and self-sacrifice. We are all enjoined to honor the flag and treat it with respect. Now, this is very interesting. Why? Because Rabbi Soloveitchik obviously believes that one should respect the flag. The flag of Israel means it's an emotional thing for him. He looks up to it as something that really symbolizes Mesirut Nefesh and Jews fighting for the state of Israel and everything else. And he does ask, does it have any halachic value? Right? I didn't hear him say, yes, it has halachic value. Meaning, he asked the question. He didn't really say there's halachic value. It has maybe religious value, theological value, but there's no real, I don't see in these words, right, besides a lot of emotion and passion, I don't necessarily see here a religious or halachic kind of idea. which is fine, obviously, but I'm just pointing out that many religious Zionists, I'm saying, would feel very comfortable with this approach, which is a classic kind of observation of the fact that even if we don't necessarily see that everything has to have halachic and Torah value always, to appreciate something, and the state of Israel is something wonderful that we appreciate. We don't have to always say, "Oh, it's a Torah value" for us to say that we appreciate it. I think that's also a very interesting insight that modern Orthodox and Zionist community sometimes believes in and highlights, unlike perhaps some other people within the religious community. However, when we get to Rav Kook, everything will change. And this will be, again, this is a reflection, I believe, of a completely different approach within the religious Zionist community. And in this case, Rav Kook is the example of not just appreciating the state and all the wonderful thing it does, but really seeing religious value and religious messages, almost messianic messages and deep ideas with the birth of the state of Israel as is reflected in the flag. And here's the story behind this writing of Rav Kook. Every writing here has a story. So this one has a very interesting story. In 1915, during World War I, there was a British army formed a Jewish legion. This was like the first time, I think, since Bar Kokhba, that Jews were fighting in a unit of their own. It's true that they weren't fighting for their homeland, but it was a very big thing that the British established such a legion. And believe it or not, this legion had a flag. And this flag had a menorah on it, listen to this, with a blue and white background, right? Which is interesting. This flag, after the war, was displayed in shuls all around over England. In December 1925, the flag was carried to Israel. It was decided to send this flag to Israel, and it was intended to be hoisted in the Churva Shul. Those of you who have been to Jerusalem the past few years know that the shul called the Churva Shul, which was destroyed in 1948, was rebuilt recently, a few years ago, in the heart of the Jewish quarter of Yerushalayim. At the time, it was considered to be the biggest shul of Yerushalayim. And this is quite interesting because you can actually read about this, that it was such a big ceremony when the flag was brought to Yerushalayim, that the entire Yerushalayim was all 50 people, right? How many people in Yerushalayim at the time? All went to the train station wearing Shabbat clothes. They called it Yom HaDegel, and they marched with this flag from the train station. Those of you who know, who've been to Yerushalayim and know now it's like a food area, the Tachana Rishonah, and from there they marched to the Churva Shul, to the old city, carrying this flag. Rav Kook, chief rabbi of Israel, greeted the flag and delivered this following speech, which I have in front of me here, but it's in Hebrew, and I will therefore explain to you what Rav Kook says in this drasha, and I admit that I will add a little bit to Rav Kook's idea about the significance of the Jewish flag. Rav Kook says, what do you think? We invented the flag just in the 20th century? No, he said. The flag is a Jewish idea that appears in the Bible. Already in the Tanakh, the tribes of Israel all had their own flags. In Sefer Bamidbar, we read about how the tribes who were stationed in different positions around the Aron, around the Mishkan, they were divided into 3 tribes, right, into 4 groups surrounding the Mishkan, and every 3 tribes had their own flag. And the Midrash, said Rav Kook, asks, where did these flags come from? The Torah says they had flags, but the Midrash is trying to understand what the meaning of the flag is. And this is a beautiful Midrash. It is just mind-blowing. The Midrash says that these flags were given to Am Yisrael after they requested them. When did the Jews request flags? At Har Sinai. The Midrash says that when we stood by the Mount of Sinai to receive the Torah, the Jewish people reached a very high level of understanding God. And at that moment, says the Midrash, they saw certain images and things that only people on that level could see. And what did they see? They saw angels carrying flags. And the Jews at the time were like little kids who were so envious of these flags. You know, like little kids like saying, oh, I want one of those. And they said, Moshe, we want a flag too. And Kosh Baruch Hu said, oh, here is your flag. It's given to you in Sefer Bamidbar. Let's understand what's going on here. What is this Midrash telling us? People have flags. The Jews want the flags. The angels have the flags. Before we do that, I want to mention another Midrash that Ibn Ezra mentions in Parashat Bamidbar. The famous commentator Ibn Ezra asked the question. He said, wait a second. These flags, what was on them? What was on these flags? Magen David, menorah. Ibn Ezra brings a Midrash that says, on the 4 flags of each of the 3 tribes, there were images. On one, there was an image of a man. On the other one, there was an image of a lion. On another one, there was an image of a bull. And then the 4th one, an image of an eagle. Now, if I would have been in a classroom right now, I would ask everyone to raise their hand and tell me, what does that remind them of? And the answer, of course, is Ma'aseh Merkava. When we learn Yechezkel, in Ezekiel, it teaches us that God chariots, considered to be one of the deepest, most secret chapters in the entire Bible, that even the rabbis tell us that we shouldn't really learn it too much because it's full of mystical meaning. However, it says there that these 4 characters are the characters which carry God's chariot. Now let's put both Midrashim together and ask, what is going on here? I don't know Kabbalah, I don't know Mysticism, but I think it's very simple to me, the meaning of the Midrash. At Har Sinai, Bnei Yisrael have a mission. They are going to start becoming the chariot of God. When we receive the Torah, it means that we are going to be carrying the Torah from now on. And we are going to live our lives by the Torah. But who carried the Torah until now? Simple, the angels. The angels, there's a famous midrash in the Gemara about how when Moshe Rabbeinu receives the Torah, the angels come to Moshe Rabbeinu, to Hashem, and say, God, why are you giving the Torah to these human beings? Keep it by us. What does that mean? That until then, it's the angels who are keeping the Torah. The flags of the angels are basically their uniform, their parade. And I think the best way to explain this is changing of the guards. Right? Anyone who ever went to England, and now it's mamash in the news about the Queen and the King and new King, knows that at Buckingham Palace there's a famous ceremony where guards of the last mishmeret, whatever it's called, mishmeret in English, help me out somewhere. The last guard duty, right? They now pass on the flag or whatever it is to the next, the changing of the guards. That's what's happening at Har Sinai. The angels are coming down with their flags, and they're giving the flags which symbolize that they are God's army, God's people, and they are now passing the flags to Bnei Israel, to Am Yisrael, who are from now on going to carry these flags. And that's why the Midrash says that the characters on the flags are the characters of the Merkavah, because from now on, we are going to be the chariot of God, as if we are going to carry the name of God with us in this world. And when the Torah was passed on to us, it means that we are now having the responsibility to be God's presentation here in this world instead of the angels. And that is the idea of the flag. So Rav Kook is saying the original flag of Am Yisrael had deep religious meaning because it meant that we were carrying the name of God in us. And here, I want to bring it all together. I know what I'm about to say right now might seem a little bit of a drasha, a little bit of a vart, some people say, but I'm it's my idea that I want to share, and you can judge me for it. I believe in it. We started the shiur with describing that the origins of the Israeli flag is from a talit. And I said to you that David Wolfson was not a religious person, was not a traditional person, and yet he suggested a religious symbol for the flag of Israel. And not just any religious symbol, but a talit, which colors are tchelet, white and tchelet, blue and white. There is a famous midrash that teaches us the significance and the uniqueness of the light color blue, the tchelet. The Gemara, the midrash says, what is tchelet like? By the way, what's a good word for tchelet, Ilana? It's not light.
It's not a blue, it's a cerise. What's that? Not cerise. There's another word for the exact blue, but I don't remember it.
Color tchelet in English. I'm asking my wife. Those colors. Oh, I think we all know what it is. So the Midrash tells us that this color is a reflection of the sea, the same color of the sea, which is a reflection of the sky, which is a reflection of Kisei HaKavod, of the chariot or the chair of God. The tchelet, this color tchelet that we put on our tzitzit, we put on our talit, is supposed to be a reflection of the chair of which God sits. That, to me, is mind-blowing. That this man, Wolfson, threw out this idea. I can't believe he knew anything what we're talking about right now. However, I believe that it wasn't his decision, but rather some kind of HaKadosh Baruch Hu somehow getting involved with this decision, telling us that the modern Israeli flag has the same purpose as the original flags of the Midbar, of the desert, when we left Egypt, which are to represent the chariot of God. And now I will throw something to you, and you can, again, do what you want with this source, but look at this. Rav Kook died in 1935, right? That's 13 years before there was a Jewish state. I don't know if people know. The name Medinat Yisrael was only decided in 1948. In fact, when America recognized Israel, it was the first country to do so, it didn't know what to call the state. The Jewish state, the Israel state, the Judaic state. state. No one knew what the official name was. So in the telegram, you have like in the original telegram, if you ever look it up, you'll see it's like erased. They didn't know what to do. They decided to call it Medinat Israel, right? The state of Israel. But Rav Kook in 1935 already writes the following sentence. Medinat Israel hi yesod kisei Hashem ba'olam. As if some prophecy, Rav Kook says that the state of Israel is the reflection of God's chariot here in this world. And I think that the flag of Israel that is based upon the tchelet and the talit, which is supposed to be the symbol of God's chair and God's existence in this world, is not just a coincidence, but rather that when the Jewish state was built, even if it's sometimes built by people that are not always that connected in every level to God and Torah, in its core, in its DNA, Am Yisrael are connected to Kadosh Baruch Hu, and in the DNA of this Jewish state, there is a deep connection to Kadosh Baruch Hu, and the vision of this country is to be, hopefully one day, a true reflection of God here in this world. And I find the coincidence just amazing. That's what Rav Kook writes in 1935. So to sum it up, we just saw that within the religious community, we had 4 different opinions. In the Haredi, as a classic world, we had Rav Moshe, who says, it's nothing bad, nothing good. I can live with it, but don't see really much meaning. We have the more extreme, like Rav Chaim Noah, who says, it's nonsense, it's a terrible thing, there's nothing to it. Then within the religious community, we said, in the modern community, in the religious science community, we have people like Rav Soloveitchik, who sees the beautiful meaning, an emotional meaning, and therefore sees it as a value. And then we have Rav Kook, who sees already the deep, almost mystical meaning of the Israeli flag, which represents Kadosh Baruch Hu and a connection to the state of Israel, thus giving it even more of a religious significance. That's really what I wanted to talk about today. At this point, if there are any comments, questions, challenges, please, you can show your, I don't know if you can show your faces more. I'm happy to hear comments or questions or challenges.
Yeah, we have a question. Johnny, you want to unmute?
Anyone?
Let's see if he, I see a hand, but let's see if he answers. I did want to ask just, when did David Wolfson bring in the flag? What year was that? Or was that the first Zionist Congress?
I'm not sure what year it was. I don't know. I can look. I'm not aware what year that it happened.
Okay. Johnny, did you have a question?
I do. So I thought the conversation was more about halakha in space and less about the flag. So if you'll just indulge me to go slightly off topic.
Okay.
How do we know that the Torah is actually applicable in space? Because don't we say, Hashamayim shamayim lashem, va'aretz natan livnei adam? And if that's correct, and if the angels who are in heaven had to hand down the Torah to Bnei Adam who are on earth, doesn't it follow logically that the Torah is applicable on earth and not in space?
So first of all, I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if anyone really knows that question. It's more of a, I would say, but if you want to use that image, when you said that, the first thing that came to my mind is, does the Torah apply outside of Israel? Because you will find that the Ramban, for example, really believed that originally the Torah was only given to be kept in Haaretz. Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et Haaretz might be meaning Eretz Yisrael, and there are many sources that indicate that originally the Torah was only supposed to be kept here, and that is why that if you look in the Tanakh, you can Google how many times does it say in the Tanakh Elokei Hashamayim. You will notice that it appears in Sefer Bereshit once with Avram. However, it appears mostly in the time of Beit Sheni, when the Jews were returning from Bavel. And the theory of some is that at that point, God needs to make sure that people understand that He is also Elokei Hashamayim and not just Elokei Haaretz. That God exists outside of Israel, as if to say, and not only in Israel, and therefore you have to keep the Torah even when you're outside of Israel. So if I would use that idea, I would say the same thing to you, that Elokei Hashamayim is also an expression in Tanakh, which would mean that God is God everywhere. I don't think that anyone would argue that halachically Torah doesn't apply today outside of Israel, and no one would argue that it doesn't apply outside of Earth. I do think that it would be very difficult to keep the Torah as we know it outside of Earth, because the Torah really was given to be to the dimensions of time and space as we know them here in Earth. Time and space outside of Earth has totally different meaning, and would be almost impossible to somehow connect mitzvot that are based on daily, cycles and so many levels to a world that doesn't have time and space. So it would be practically very difficult. I don't think it would mean that it wouldn't apply. It just would be very difficult to actually live by it. As I said, if you're interested, there is material written about this. You can Google it, you can look online. Rav Kasher was the first one who did this. Rav Bleich, I think, writes about this. There's a website, the Star K has an article about this. It's interesting, but I think it's only interesting more in theory than in practice. I really don't know, and it's a good question. What would happen in the future if really space travel becomes a real common thing? I think it would really create a very, very big challenge for religious people what they would do.